Let's start.
All right. Maybe to start with, we want to talk about the Mapungubwe kingdom as a prehistoric kingdom. We want to give the Mapungubwe kingdom narrative. But before we go deep into that, I've got a few things just to say. Number one, I'm quite aware that the story of Mapungubwe on the internet or in Google, it's very shallow and people don't have a clues about it so much, to the extent that a researcher with the quest to know would find it very difficult to get the story of Mapungubwe in detail. You'll find the king of Mapungubwe, the kingdom, and a few other things, some of which are not very correct. So I've decided to come with this narrative in order that he may be satisfied, or his quest may be quenched, who really wants to know about the kingdom in great detail. Also, I deem it fit, before we go deep, to say that I am Mr. TR RAKHADANI, one of the historians in Venda or in Bembe or in South Africa, so to put it. And I will do my best to try and narrate the story to the extent that I want to believe, although what I'm saying is not absolute or cast in concrete, but I have confidence that the narrative I'm giving here, which will have quite a number of episodes. This is episode 1, which we are starting off today on the 3rd of July 2026. Other episodes will follow in due course. So I want to do my best so that whoever has more or better information about certain aspects under the topics that I'll discuss will also be of assistance and welcome. Again, what I'm going to be sharing is contained in this book, which is my book and history book written basically in Venda, our mother tongue. So this is the book that I've written, and I want to believe whoever wants to hear and know more about what I'll be sharing here will do well to get your own copy. I have no hesitation or doubt in my mind that this very book has to be every Movenda household's handbook. Each and every one of the Venda households deserves this, to have this book in their custody. It is rich, it has a lot in it. It helps learners and scholars and researchers with valuable information. So whoever may buy this will be doing themselves a favor. A lot of learners in schools, from primary to secondary schools, they need this information on proverbs, in our Venda proverbs, idiomatic expressions, and a number of other very important things which are in this very book. And let alone the fact that it contains an unbiased and indisputable history of all the Venda people, the 7 groups that compose our nation today. Each of them is well represented or discussed in detail right in this book. Yes, another book will follow, owing to the availability of funds, titled The Mapungubwe Kingdom, which, as I'm speaking, it has volume 1 and volume 2. So volume 1 is almost ready for printing, pending the availability of funds. It's ready. That's wherein I translated this Venda book into English and expatiated it far more than what is contained here. It has a lot of other information and things that we got through research and through reading, of course. So I want to recommend that everybody buys this book, and when the other book in English becomes available, I'll urge all our people to read it. Particularly, that one will be far much better because non-Venda speakers will be able to read it and understand what's in it. Back to the point and the focus of the day. I have said we want to give the Mapungubwe Kingdom narrative so that he may understand, that listens and hears, because I want to share valuable information here with my fellow Venda in Venda and all over the country, my fellow citizens in Limpopo province, and of course right across Mzansi, South Africa, and the world. Sit down, listen, observe, analyze, and criticize when needs be. Now, let's talk about the Mapungubwe Kingdom. Now, before I go delve deeper into the kingdom itself, the question is, what is a kingdom? I think it's very important because people do speak of kings and queens. But unfortunately, in the South African context, most of these queenships and kingships are more political than cultural or traditional. Politics in this country, perhaps even across the continent, has really had a very bad impact upon our royal leadership. So when you talk of a kingdom, the concept or noun kingdom is a combination of two words, a king and a domain. That really means that is the domain which is ruled by a king, where the king is the absolute authority. Then, unlike what it is today, where you got politicians who appoint kings or inaugurate kings, so to put it properly, and then the kings are like accountable to the politicians, maybe the president, state president of the republic. But you look into the kingdom in Britain, in Swaziland and Denmark and other countries of the world, their kingdoms or their king or queen is above politics. They appoint the premiers or the prime ministers in their country, because where there's one kingdom and one king or queen, you can't have a state president who has got executive powers. In their countries, they only have and mainly have prime ministers, because the absolute authority lies with the king or queen. So was it here in South Africa, which I believe we shall all see as we delve deeper into this episode 1 and, of course, going forward to the second, third, and other episodes that will follow, this will become very clearer and clearer as we carry on with this narrative. So I was saying a kingdom is an area under the rule or the leadership of a king, the domain of a king. So where the king has authority. Now, let's go to the kingdom of Mapungubwe itself. Now, what does the name Mapungubwe mean? Before we go to the kingdom again, so as to clarify this point. Saying this, I'm fully aware there are people who say Mapungubwe means this and that and that. For example, Professor M.E.R. Matiba and Professor Arushai, they went to an extent of saying Mapungubwe means a place of jackals, thinking that because in our language, a jackal is called Pungubwe, then they thought Mapungubwe means a place of jackals, but that was not correct. Mapungubwe, number one, came as a result of this art and skill of our ancestors who lived there millions of years ago. They were capable of smelting the hard metals like gold, silver, and other hard metals. The dominant metal that they specialized on was gold. Yes, our ancestors said to Mapungubwe, before the arrival of any white person or settler in this country, let alone perhaps the continent, they were capable of growing cotton, and they harvested cotton and made clothes and other products out of it. That was one of the very special abilities or skills that our ancestors had. They were not taught by those who arrived or came as settlers. No. In our own indigenous knowledge systems, they used that to produce products out of cotton, which they grew at Mapungubwe. So Mapungubwe, as I said, and as I'll show later, was the Agoli of Southern Africa during its heydays. That is, if I were to use the name Gauteng as it is today, the real Gauteng, then 600 years before the establishment of the Witwatersrand, was Mapungubwe, a place of abundant gold. So after these guys or our ancestors smelted the metal, the gold, then they would, and gold to us is a stone, I think we all know, and in our language, a stone is named or called Ibwe, or Ive, or Ihe. For example, in, as you say, Mahemachen, where there are white stones, Zingahe, where the stones look like that black snake, Zinga. So Maheni, as today they call it Mahikeng or Mafikeng, that's Maheni, because it was part of the kingdom then. And so that those words mean one and the same thing. Ibe, Ihe, Ive. It's one thing. So Mapungubwe is where they smelted the gold. And after it was melted, they wanted to make different sizes and types of products. Then they will pour out the smelted liquid. So the process of pouring out, which in our language, you can either call it ushurura kana pungura or pungura. So then pungu plus ibye, then came the name of Mapungubye, where the stones, one Ibye, when it's one, when there are many, it's Mabwe. So it's the place where they poured out the stones that were smelted. So the name Mapungubye came as a result. It might also be of interest to the public to indicate here and now that Mapungubye was not the first name of the area. It went by quite a number of names over time. For example, it was known as Itolangwari, God's eye. Why? Because of its position and height, where the king would sit on top of the mountain and watch over his people, and it was likened as a leader of the nation to God who watches his people from heaven. So Itolangwari means Mwari or God's eye. It was also known as Chavadzimo, the place of the gods. This came about because our ancestors, particularly the kings who ruled from the mountain or the hillock, they stayed there, and they were the high priests of the nation when it came to their religious and other practices. So the king was the ultimate leader, ultimate priest, to whom every and any appeal would be made when there were disasters and other unfortunate circumstances affecting the nations, when those who were junior to him had failed to handle and solve them. They would then finally, as we will see later in our episodes, the organogram. In this very episode, I will show the organogram, but some of the things that were done by the chiefs in the districts and other areas, that's where they handled matters of the communities, but when they failed, everything would come to Mapungubye, to the king himself. So that's why I say it was called Chavadzimo. It was also called Makorere because of its height as well. And so after the discovery and the smelting of hard metals, it became known as Mapungubye. That's where the name Mapungubye became dominant, because of the ability that was so special of our ancestors then. Again, I think we need to look at Mapungubye not in isolation, but as a lingua franca, in the sense that now it was not the only name with the Ibye or the stone. You see Mapungubye together with Subwe, which is the area now called Maruping, there in Krugersdorp, Gauteng, or in between Gauteng and Northwest, just there, but I think it's Gauteng. Then you got your Chilida Mbombwe in Tanzania. Mbombwe there, Chilida, it's the sound or the growling sound of the extinct volcano in Tanzania, because Tanzania, as we shall see later, was part of the Mapungubye kingdom, was ruled at Mapungubye during its heydays. And then Topo Mabwe, which is Matopo Hills today, Zimbabwe, or which people now call Zimbabwe, but the real name is Zimbabwe, houses made of stone. So the Mapungubye as a lingua franca, I think it becomes more clearer as I've said and done it just now. Now, we can confirm these by reading from Rob Marsh's book, which says, that is, you call it South Africa Weird and Wonderful. On page 6, he says, why is Mapungubye special? It is not common in the archaeological world that you can actually pinpoint and say, this is the place where society transformed from one quite different kind of organization to another. That's one of the things that makes this place absolutely unique. These were the words of Professor Thomas Huffman in 2001. Mapungubwe, at the height of its power for only 60 to 80 years during the 13th century, was South Africa's first Egoli, a place where gold was melted 600 years before Johannesburg was established. Indeed, the crafting of gold was to become the trademark of Mapungubwe. It was also the center of an important trading area and probably the first location in southern Africa where cotton was grown and woven into cloth. This just further confirms what I was saying, that it was the Egoli of southern Africa, and it is where cotton was first grown and woven into cloth in southern Africa. So, going further, I want us to go further and say, is Mapungubwe kingdom the only name that this kingdom had? Well, no. It was called by a number of names until the Mapungubwe kingdom as a noun became dominant or known as it is today. At a time before Mapungubwe, they smelted the iron. It was called the Vangona kingdom, because it is the kingdom of the Vangona, as we shall see later. It went on to be called, as it was spreading far and near. Rob Marsh has indicated, and the other writers too, like Henish. You do have Dr. Beach. David Beach was a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe. Nemziba the Castle du Plessis, and many others, who indicate that the Mapungubwe kingdom had dominated the whole of the SADC region as we know it today. Much as I indicated earlier on that Chirambombe is in Tanzania, because Tanzania was then under the Mapungubwe kingdom. It came also to be known as the United Kingdom of Venda and the Mapungubwe Empire, but today we know it as Mapungubwe Kingdom. Now, I think to go further, Mapungubwe became the capital city of the kingdom because that's where the king ruled from. That's where the king stayed. And Rob Marsh says here, to confirm what I'm saying, more significantly still, Mapungubwe was a place where Southern African society was transformed from one kind of organization to another, where for the first time in Southern Africa, a king ruled over his subjects and in turn was venerated by them. This confirms what I was saying, that it was ruling over the whole of the Southern African region, the SADC today, as we know it. So this was the capital city of that kingdom. And to this, there is no dispute. Can I maybe come with the organogram of the kingdom, how it was structured, this kingdom of Mapungubwe? The kingdom stood as follows. From the very bottom, the last tier of the kingdom or the government, you had what we call today petty head men, Wakoma in our language. That was the last tier of the organogram of the kingdom. And above them, in our language properly, Mahosana, today they are called headmen and women. But Reneriba Vidorin Mahosana, Boba Chivizonga Raro, ever since time immemorial, if I must say. Then above the Mahosana, or the headmen as they are called today, we had Mahosi, chiefs, or today senior traditional leaders. Now, when we talk of Mahosi, we have a problem in our language. The Venda 1936 Venda version of our Bible, when translated, they took this noun from apparently Sesotho or Sepedi, the Hoshi, then they call it, there's a book called Zikosi. But I want to put it loud and clear for all to understand. Ngachivenda arina zvinofi dzikosi ritova namahosi. In our language, we don't have dzikosi, rena mahosi, we have got mahosi. Not dihoshi as it is in other languages, which is fine, but ela bibeli yokakiwa ichimwa translate wa ufi dzikosi ndi mahosi. Anyway, above the chiefs or senior traditional leaders, we had paramount chiefs, which are today called principal traditional leaders. But I need to put it very clearly that I don't know if we have principal traditional leaders in South Africa. I don't seem to hear this happening yet. Reason being, transformation is taking too long, particularly the establishment of kingships. Yeah. Our government appointed the Ntlapo Commission, but unfortunately, its work has come under very serious scrutiny. A lot of litigation still going on. And so there are many challenges. Unfortunately, not even our politicians seem to be very interested in this. Hence, the conflict there is between traditional leaders and municipalities. Because the municipalities have assumed the powers, functions, roles, and responsibilities, in some cases, of the royal leaders. Now, there is that conflict, those tensions are there. Perhaps over time they'll be resolved, we wish. But mainly if the kings are appointed who know and whose kingships and queenships have been established according to customary laws and customs, culture and tradition, not politics. As most of these traditional leaders are mainly politicians and more political than they could be, royal or traditional. So the organogram had paramount chiefs who also served as the cabinet of His Majesty, the King. Now, in our language, the king is called Tobe. Unfortunately, this title in Venda today, where you've got 28 chiefs, each of whom is called Tobe, I think that is wrong. They are not Tobe. It is a wrong title to them. But understandably so, because each of the chiefs, the 28 chiefs, is equal to the other. There's not one more senior to the others. So unfortunately, as we shall see later in the episodes that will follow, the Mbebra family, in the minds of so many people, is still thought to be the most senior of the traditional leaders in Venda. That's an era, that's wrong, a wrong perception, a wrong school of thought. I hope in the course of my narratives, this will become more clear with a lot of evidence to prove to the contrary of what is believed by many. So you have got paramount chiefs who serve the cabinet of His Majesty the King Botobere. Why he was called Tobere? He was called Tobere because above him there was no other authority except the heavenly Lord, God Almighty, the King of Kings. So the king accounted to not a human being because there was none above him. I indicated the case of Britain or United Kingdom. Yeah, the queen there or whoever is the king is the absolute authority, accountable to nobody above them, except that there are means and ways of controlling and governing, which must be constitutional. But otherwise, I'm saying our kingdom was like that. But today, here in South Africa alone, you've got a lot of kings and queens and what have you. Where all this comes from, it's mainly political, and because the politicians want to stay in power and call the shots and rule over the owners of the land. That's what they are doing because they've got the real political power. Much as our head of state in South Africa, whoever they be, is called an executive president because they hold or wield executive powers. That is politics. I was trying to give the organogram of our kingdom. Right on top, Tawere, the king, Maosma Uru, principal traditional leaders or paramount chiefs then. After them, chiefs. Chiefs would have, okay, let me say this before I move down from the paramount chiefs, because these paramount chiefs or principal traditional leaders, as they are called today, were distributed across the entire kingdom. The areas from which they ruled were called district centers. For example, you got Marunguzi, where my paramount chief Mbezi Matibe rules from. You got Mabanga Paswana at Musiningira. You got Chibi of Achibi, Rubimbi of Dambezi or Halubimbi, which you call Zambezi area today, but Zambezi is a corrupted form of Dambezi because that's the area dominated by Zambezi even today. So saying Dambezi or Zambezi, you are just testifying that that is an area mainly dominated by the Zambezi or the Mahungwe people. The Hungwe is another topic for another day. We'll come to that during the course of the narratives. So you got Mangwadu Emnyai in Eastern Botswana, Lefurudzi, Lamangwadu. You got Paramount Chief Murava in Pretoria, Emnyai Chief or Paramount Chief. That's Emnyai is a totem. We shall come to totems later. And then you had, and now that's why the area is still called Mara. There's a small portion of it called Marava Stad. To put it more correctly and appropriately, the whites who came and found the paramount chief Murava, they could not pronounce Murava. They said Marava. As much as they could not pronounce Ruvubu, they said Livubu, Zanani, Zanini, and a whole range of other incorrect spellings or corrupt pronunciations of the names. So you got Marava Stad. Stad is Afrikaans naam wat beteken in Engels city. So it's Marava city. Yes, today political they call it Tshwane. That's another issue. That's the area for Marava. As Marava Stad still attests to the city of the Banyai of Amrava. So you had Neviravira of Viravira, the Bakwevos there, Varambat. You had Burugwane, Maswele Machava, Equinda. You got Chikororo of Haskororo, the Badau there, Nedzanani of Zanani called Zanin, and a whole lot of others like Paramount Chief Muronga of Amronga in Mozambique. and a whole lot of others, quite a lot of them. So I was just indicating there were paramount chiefs who, some of them were the cabinet of His Majesty the King, and then they were spread across many district centers in the kingdom. So that's the organogram of the Mapungubwe kingdom. Then perhaps let me go further to say, how big was the Mapungubwe kingdom? I've already indicated or quoted from Rob Marsh, then who indicated that this kingdom had spread across southern Africa. One can also quote from Nemzibadi et al. In their document and published as well, which is called the final edited report of the Zata Exhibition Museum. He wrote this together with Dr. Skessel and Duplessis. So on page 8 of the same document, they say, Mapungubwe, which developed around a flat-topped hill, was believed to be the headquarters of an African kingdom. It is here that a class-based society is found. This was a direct result of the wealth that accumulated through the East Coast trade, together with the power that went with controlling and redistributing the trade goods to loyal followers. The king with his wives lived on top of the hill, secluded from the common people. As archaeologists and anthropologists have not yet agreed on the beginning and the early inhabitants of Mapungubwe, resort will have to be taken to follow Venda tradition and views of Afrocentric researchers on both sides of the Venda. From their findings, the early Iron Age people who inhabited the area north and south of the Vembe from 330 to 900 AD could have been Vangona, Vambezi, and Vanyai. Unfortunately, okay, let me skip that. Therefore, as far as Mapungubwe is concerned, the inhabitants could have been Vangona and Vambezi, while those of Tulamela were Vanyai Chilembetu. So I'm just indicating that Mapungubwe, at the Mapungubwe Empire, or the Mapungubwe Empire had spread across the southern African region, as it is already clear from what I've quoted just above. So we know this was the only kingdom, one king, but over time, they developed through these wars and other factors like the settlers having settled here, their divide and rule policies and things like that. So they had to promote other people and form kings and kingdoms so that then, having divided us, it will be easier for them to rule over us. That is what they did to us, those people. Now, how old was the Mapungubwe kingdom? Perhaps one is to say, a lot of researchers say the Mapungubwe kingdom has been there for 1,000 years or 1,000 years ago. This is not correct, simply because of the following. Number one, according to the Mapungubwe nomination dossier, unfortunately I don't have it here, but I think during the course of time I'll come with it because the narrative still goes on. Then it says Mapungubwe has been there, the kingdom was there for millions of years. And I concur with this because go to Maruping, the cradle of humankind today, as I alluded to earlier, in Krugerstop, they call it Maruping, we call it Marubini in our language. That's where our ruins as humanity lie. Maruping is called very rightly and correctly so, indisputably so, the cradle of humankind. This is confirmed by inscriptions on some of the stones or rocks there. You'll find inscriptions there where they say, all of humanity shares an African origin. All of us as humanity, that's where our umbilical cords lie buried. In other words, all of humanity originated here in South Africa. In Africa, particularly and specifically in South Africa. They continue to say, life first emerged here in South Africa, or Africa, South Africa specifically, more than 2.8 or 3 billion years ago. They'll go on to say a lot of things. I'll still come with this evidence in later episodes, where I'll perhaps confirm by reading what is written. But those who have been to Maruping and were inquisitive and cautious enough would concur with me that if more than some billions years ago there was a life, if a number of millions of years ago there were people here, who are they? The whole human race, humankind, originated in Africa. The reason why you got many continents like America, Europe, Asia, etc., it's very clear to understand. Reading the Bible, Genesis chapters 10 to 11, you'll hear about God dividing the nations of the world during one of the sons of our ancestors called Peleg, which means the division of the human race. It was God's purpose to divide us so we could spread us as humanity or as his people or his creation, the workmanship of his hands. God decided to divide humanity and got us spreading across the entire world. 1, 2. Reading Genesis chapter 11, as I have already alluded to it, that's where the people under the leadership of Nimrod, a black man for that matter. Nimrod is a black man. Nimrod was the most powerful man on earth during his time. Not only that, he with his people decided to build a strong and very tall tower whose tip they wanted to reach the heavens. And they started. The Bible says they spoke one language of one accord and unity. If you read Genesis chapter number 11, you find that these guys wanted to build and started to build a tower, and it was going up because of their unity in purpose, in mind and heart, and in language. So until the Almighty Jehovah Shammah El Shaddai decided to come down and destroy their tower and confuse their language again, that led to the distribution and spreading of people across the globe. Another factor which we know in science or geography as well is continental drift, which further served the Creator, the Master Jehovah's purpose to spread or distribute and move the continents away from each other. So everything is serving the purpose of the Master, the Creator, Almighty God. So we don't have a problem to say, but you are saying all the people originated there. Yes, God decided that we be as we are. the Asiatics, the Americans, whatever, the whites, and they have very, very different colors, Asians, and we the blacks in our different colors. But it was under Nimrod that a first city was built on earth. It was under Nimrod that this guy started to have education or to establish education, the art of writing, and all that which goes with education was started by black people in the world. We should not look down upon ourselves. Another topic for another day. Perhaps towards conclusion, let me try to address the question of the ownership of the Mapungubwe people. Already from where I read in some of the pages or quotations that I've made, we understand who the owners of Mapungubwe are today because of the importance of Mapungubwe as it is. Albeit many people think Mapungubwe is only that very small portion of that farm, which is Mapungubwe National Park today, and the World Heritage Site. And the farm is only 28,000 hectares. People think the Mapungubwe Kingdom was just in that portion, but I shall indicate it further here that it was bigger than that, because that is a farm which has been fenced, and so Mapungubwe is not that area. You look at Venetia and many other areas around, they were part of the Mapungubwe Kingdom then, not as we see Mapungubwe today. So I said, in my discussion or my narrative, I'll go further to show that the Mapungubwe Kingdom was very big. Rob Marsh again, if I must quote him or read from him, in his book, South Africa, Weird and Wonderful. This book is unpublished. He says, to climb the mountain, you must go zigzag. That means when you are climbing the king's residence. Another topic for another day. During the period when the Mapungubwe settlement was at the height of its power and influence, it had an estimated population of 3,000 to 5,000 and covered an empire of more than 30,000 square meters. The vast majority of its people lived on the plain, surrounding the hill, with only the ruling elite living on the mount itself. The king and his retinue stayed on the summit, where they were isolated and protected, while the members of the royal family occupied the terraces below. Interestingly, a reminder of this period is a Venda saying that still survives today. To climb the mountain, you must go zigzag, which means to approach the king, one must use an intermediary. Okay, there's a lot that goes with that. I think one needs to go to Henish, who was the lecturer of anthropology at the University of Venda, in his document called Legends, Oral Traditions and Archaeology, a look at early Venda history, by E.O.M. Henish, Department of Anthropology, University of Venda. I think this document was written somewhere around 1991. And then he says, he confirms that Mapungubwe belongs to the Vangona. You will understand. I'm reading page 68 of the essay. On examining the belief that Venda came from Zaire or Congo, the following comes to light. It would appear that this story came from the Reverend Buster of the Lutheran Missionary Society, who was the first missionary to work on any large scale in Venda. In other words, Reverend Buster taught this thing, as you'll hear. Apparently, he had at one stage in his life worked in the Congo and thought that he recognized words with similar meanings when comparing the Congolese language with Chivenda, correct? Because Congo was part of the Vangona kingdom. His erroneous conclusion was that the Venda originated in the Congolese region, but on moving southwards, had over the years lost their language, only retaining a core vocabulary. This notion was taught in his little school to the children of his Christian converts, and this way was disseminated to a large part of the local population. Let me go also to page 71, where he continues to give us further evidence about the Mapungubwe kingdom. Page 71. A small elongated kingdom containing several district centers and covering an area from the Sotbansberg in the south to Matopos near Bulawayo in the north was controlled from Mapungubwe. Each district appears to have had its own local capital under the jurisdiction of Mapungubwe. Numerous sites of these old villages are still to be seen along the Sotmansberg, extending deep into the heart of the present-day Venda. Then, let me quickly go to page 73 to conclude my quote from Henish. On the basis of oral tradition, therefore, it seems reasonable to accept that the Mapungubwe people who lived in the mountains were known by the name of Vangono. So that is Henish confirming that Mapungubwe was a kingdom of the Vangona. Everybody knows and believes. I can go on to read from a lot of writers. But the fact and the truth of the matter is, Mapungubwe was the kingdom of the original Aboriginal citizens of this area. Everybody who is in South Africa, let alone Venda or Limpopo, if you like it today, or Vembe, they know, they agree, they converse. Even the people who are called Bapedi today, or Bapedi, if you like it, they agree from the military history journal that I have here. They agree that when they came to the area of Rumbelure from Bechuanaland, they found a people, Bavenda group there, called Bambeti, who had powers for rainmaking, smelting hard metals, making products, many products from those hard metals. They revered them, wanted to identify with them. They wanted to call themselves Bambedi, but because of the difficulty of pronunciation, they called themselves Bapedi. To call themselves Bapedi simply means Bambedi, because they wanted to fall under the leadership and the rule of the Bambedi. Bapedi is a corrupt form of the name Bambedi. I think all the Bapedi people know this. It originated there. You find it in the military history journal. You also find it in Ndedezi or the Venda reader, Ndedezi of the Swiss Mission, page 13 of Ndedezi for Standard 5. So you find it also in many other places. So that is a sign people know this area was under Bangona. I've already indicated towards my conclusion for today that the king stayed at Mapungubwe, and he was a Mongona king. And I might go on to say there were so many kings who ruled from there. First and known king that we have, much as we will agree that if the kingdom has been there for some millions of years, even hundreds of years, thousands of years, we would find it difficult to tell because nothing was written about those ancestors. Something that happened 10,000 or 20,000 years ago, it is difficult for us to tell who was doing that and who was not doing it, etc. So let alone the fact that our kings could not be known per se. But at least what we know is that the first known was called Mongona Shiria Denga. And then Shiria Denga became the dynastic title, going down up to where it changed with Chidziwelele, then and other titles, but mainly Shiria Denga, Chidziwelele, Shiria Denga, Chidziwelele. Then we had a lot of these guys. And in this book that I've indicated earlier, we have got a number of them, and I must say this or read this just for your convenience, so that we will all understand who the kings were who ruled from Mapungubwe. Then, here is the list of our kings who ruled from Mapungubwe. You had Tobere Shiria Denga, Mongona Shiria Denga, Chidziwelele, King Chidziwelele Nepawe, King Sayani Nepawe, King Nanganani Nepawe, King Tobere Denga Nepawe, King Mbanguleni Nepawe, Tobere Tidibali Nepawe, Tobere Mudzunga Nepawe. The list goes on up to the current claimant to the Venda kingship, Chidziwelele, number 33. So I think for today, I rest my case in episode 1. I wrap it up here. We'll go on to talk about Bangona. It's a nation, who they are, how to identify them, and a whole range of other things to confirm further from written and oral sources that indeed they are the aborigines of this area. I thank you.